Welcome back to BBN. I'm your host, Nigel Bombardo, and for those of you who can still tune in, we will continue our coverage of the recent zombie apocalypse. But it's not safe, Nigel! We have to do what we can for the people. Don't be a sissy, Bernard. In light of the zombie apocalypse currently taking place, we at BBN thought we'd spend some time looking back on how this all started. Back in 1973, almost a century ago, Herbert Boyer and Stanley Cohen were the first people to insert DNA from one organism into another. This resulted in the first GMOs, or genetically modified organisms. Before this time, breeding of animals and plants had to take place by selecting for desired traits over generations. With this new development, it was much easier to alter an organism's characteristics. Instead of waiting for the trait to become more prominent over generations, you could simply select DNA from a different organism that had to have the desired trait, copy it, and insert it into a different organism. This process started by modifying a single nucleus of a cell, adding it a tiny section of DNA, and then treating it with naturally occurring hormones to stimulate the cell's reproduction, making the altered section much larger. In 1982, the first GMO was approved for use, insulin, which treated diabetes. Throughout the 90s, genetically modified fruits and vegetables such as tomatoes, summer, squash, soybeans, cotton, corn, papayas, tomatoes, potatoes, and canola became available for purchase. This produce was altered to enhance flavor, burst in resistance, yield, as well as other desirable traits in 2015. GMO salmon was the first genetically modified animal approved. Even at the time, there were few problems with GMOs. They were sometimes used unnecessarily, simply to alter the appearance of food they made. Tomatoes looked more red, or apples looked shinier. While this made the produce sell better, it had no real benefit to the consumer. GMOs were used to make plants resistant to toxic herbicides, which meant you could spray all the harmful chemicals you wanted into the environment without harming the plant. That's part of the reason you can't go outside without a gas mask these days. Spraying these pesticides also could create superbugs, which had adapted to the pesticides and could still attack the plant. People worried that GMOs could affect other organisms in the environment, even in the 2020s, but had no idea to the extent which they would. The coronavirus was enough to worry about back then. In 2032, Sathert Braunkloktik experimented with modifying the DNA of humans. He used DNA from multiple species and merged them to form what he called a genome serum. Without proper consent, he immediately began testing it on people. Long story short, anyone affected by the serum was horribly mutated into a zombie. It's been nearly 12 years since then, and the apocalypse has shown no signs of slowing down, with over 78% of the world's population infected. It's times like these that make me wish it was still the pen. Nigel! They got in! What? Bernard!
We forgot this part of the assignment, but this has to do with class because it directly relates to DNA, and also I think that they use some of the same methods that we used in that lab.